And we're live. Hello, everybody. If I can find my tongue. All right, this is Meredith Lochran, and this is the Comic Newb. We are launching this new show. Yep, we're going to go round robin, and everybody's going to introduce themselves. You know, maybe some of the projects that you've worked on, and but you know, again, this is the first official podcast of the Comic Newb, and it was kind of funny how I fell into this because Rob Anderson, who is running a little bit late, had invited me into the Comic Book Advocating Network, and I thought about it for about a half a day, and I was just kind of saying maybe I should say no because I don't know shit about comic books. I really don't. I mean, this is just full disclosure, and he says, well, you know, I know the type of person that you are. You're very helpful. You love advocating and things like that. And so I slept on it. I said, let me sleep on it. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, the Comic Newb, because it's something that I've always wanted to do. And I never had the chance to do it. And now is the time. I said, I got it. And he says, I love it. Let's run with it. So here we are. We're going to go around the room. We're going to start with Brian, and we're going to go kind of clockwise and introduce yourselves, what you do, and you know, how comic books has maybe affected you in your life. And we go, Brian.
All right. Thank you very much, Meredith. I'm Brian K. Morris of Rising Tide Publications. Note the sophisticated graphics. Anyway, we publish comic books, and we publish. There we go, Meredith. Good girl. Well done, young Jedi.
I'm learning.
But never pass up a chance. But anyway, we also publish books, and we publish comic books. Plus, we are a freelance writer contributing to other comics from other companies. Because one thing, if Brian comes back, he'll tell you this little floppy pamphlet here is not just a little bit of a potential moneymaker. It's your business card. Anyway, we are also a morning talk show host here on the interwebs at 10 a.m. every day on Facebook and YouTube. Plus, we've been known to publish a few books that have been selling on 3 different continents, mostly strong heroic females, pulp-flavored adventures, and stuff with a little bit of twisted humor there, obviously. So I've been reading comics since I was 3 years old because I love the 4-color, vibrant stuff. And plus, at the time I was growing up, I was a huge fan of George Reeves' The Adventures of Superman TV show. And there was these little paper things that had his adventures in it. So I asked my mother, how do you know what they're saying to each other? How do you know how to buy each, you know, like breakfast cereal? How do you know what's in the boxes? And she said, you learn to read. And I said, Mom, please teach me. So I was the only person in first grade who could spell the word invulnerable and knew what it meant. And through that, eventually, I grew to love writing, creating stories. And one day, finally, in my tender years here, I became a hybrid publisher. I publish myself and I'm published by others, and I do comics for myself and other people. And we'll get into the rest of that after I've had my time in the spotlight. Let's take it to Ted now.
How you doing, everybody? I'm Ted Davies. I am the owner of Ted Davies Artistry. I'm an author and a artist. I am currently working on Albino Zulu is one of the newest deals that we're working with right now in a mini comic. I'm also an author of Retrieve, which is a sci-fi thriller, and we'll be launching that next week. And I will be doing Grimm 101, a romantic tale, a little bit darker side of it, but we'll be doing that here next month as well. I do a lot of different watercolor-based art is my thing, watercolor and ink. And yeah, that's it. So take it over. To Jake, you next.
Thank you. I'm Jake Estrada. I'm an artist, publisher, director, actor, humorist, a madman, a father, a bouncer, a gardener. Anything you think, I do it. I'm that guy you point at. Hey, that's that guy that does comics and also gardening 101. I'm the creator of Bocas. This was my first original right here. Mm-hmm. This guy was based off my father originally. My father was a huge inspiration for comic books as growing up. He gave me my first comic book, which was The Punisher, real violent. I love violence. I'm from Philly. You know, I like shooting people. So, yeah, so The Punisher The Punisher, that was one of the first comics I read as a little kid, 6 years old, almost 40 years ago. I read that comic. I fell in love with comics, and I wanted to be a comic book artist. And they told me, son, you're crazy, but okay, do what you want to do. So I created Bookmark. Then I created Screw Phillips. Then I had a wild idea when I moved out here in Brevard County in Florida. I created a Demon in a Spacesuit for Space Coast Comics, which was a free comic book magazine that I distributed for 5 years straight. And I dropped in about 80 different locations. I used to publish about 5,000 copies a month. And then I created Donut Demons. If you're looking at this right here, Donut Demons. I did this comic as well, which was a comedy comic. I still draw. And then I went into acting, which was another passion of mine. And eventually I directed my feature film, Bookmark. I've also starred in several independent films out here in Brevard County, along in Orlando. And I've starred in a few different TV shows and stuff like that. Acting and everything like that are based off comic books and a bunch of other stuff. I from published to also working with the newspaper, doing a comic strip for the local newspaper here for the Spanish community, for Aldea Today. I have done art for them, and I've done various other stuff. And comics run in my blood. Like I always tell my wife, I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to different characters I'm creating. Even in my sleep, I write them out and everything like that. So I'm nonstop. So enough of me right now. Let's turn it over to Professor Tico.
Here we go.
Yeah, I'm Trey Lutkins.
You there?
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, sorry about your name.
Oh, no worries.
Trico, I think it is. Come on,
Yeah.
Trike, you there?
Yeah. Trey Lutkins. I co-founded a publishing company back in 2013. Did that for a while. Around 2016, 17, I left that company. Basically just to focus on my own writing, and then I was doing freelance jobs for a while, so I wasn't doing any of my own writing, but it was nice because it was some extra cash. And quit doing freelance jobs about a year ago because I just started getting a lot of college classes to teach, and now I'm kind of on the verge of publishing some more books and working on my own writing again.
Yeah, very cool. All right. And let's get back over here to the panel. We've got a few people who are popping in to say hello. We've got Teresa Dunn, good evening. And Paul Roof, who says, hello, everyone. Paul Roof says, for Jake, he's never heard of any of those comics, but they sound really good. So so this panel is from story to script. And I am on this journey. And I have to say that I've joined a lot of groups that are supposed to be for comic book creators, where you can collaborate and things like that. And I don't know if they're good or bad. I'm starting to see it with a bird's eye view that it might not be so good. And the reason why is because I see a lot of people who say, I have a story, who wants to be the artist.
Yeah.
Okay. And I kind of feel like that, but I know better because that just seems so rude. And I don't think that you can, as a storyteller, you can't just go into a different field and expect that you have the reputation or just the connections to collaborate with people. So a lot of those groups I'm finding are kind of mean. You have a lot of people who are in the business, and they're going, haha, it's like they're not really giving value. They're kind of teasing you, and they're saying, go away, or find your own way. And so I'm not finding value. What do you guys see in groups like that? And do you think that there is value in
Run
them?
away.
Okay.
Yep.
And that's it. Thanks for watching the show, everyone.
Yeah,
We've solved our problem.
That really sucks.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's a good place to start, figure out the field, figure out what you want to do. And you may be able to tell from looking at some of the art that's posted, as well as how the people post, what they say, as to whether you want to reach out, maybe get to know them. Because the thing is, I've collaborated, almost everyone I've collaborated with that where I've had some sort of editorial hand involved, I've known them and we're friends and we wanted to work together. When I've done stuff for other people, I let the editor handle the other person's ego and try to pull the work from them. But if you're going to be your own editor, I would say the thing to do is, join these groups and discover what value you get from interacting with them. And like in your case where you're meeting, we talk about gatekeepers a lot, and everybody thinks they're a freaking gatekeeper of the comics realm or whatever. But you'll be able to tell who reaches out to you, who's going to be kind to you, who may say, "Okay, Meredith, I hear you have a comic idea. Just give me a little taste of what it's like. What genre is it in?" That sort of thing. And you'll eventually learn who is potentially a good collaborator. Plus, you're getting good at networking.
Yep.
And that's a huge thing. It's like, that way you can, get somebody to vet your collaborator for you. So
that's a good point. I can't hear Trico, but Trico was an editor for me on my book Retrieve, and he is Trico. I can't say enough about. And Trico and I met through my former publisher, which great experience nonetheless. But Trico, there was no ego. And you have to go with that gut feeling. If you know somebody, you feel right with them, you'll know, and you'll learn from that. Hopefully you'll learn from the bad ones too, unfortunately, but I think that you've got to go with your gut. I mean, ego is a huge part in any business, I think, but especially in this endeavor that we all call comics and publishing, for that matter. But what do you think, Jake?
Yeah, pretty much like Brian was saying, you join this group so you meet like-minded people and you start networking, you start seeing who you gel with, who you don't like, who you don't want to work with, and you start sharing ideas and you start building those relationships, because that's on all types of business, regardless of comics or anything, is networking and who you like and who you become friends with. And mostly in this industry, we work with who we like and who we become friends with a lot.
Right.
True. Very true.
Trico, how about you?
Oh, I'm still, I appreciate all the good things Ted said. I have a single man tear just kind of streaming down my cheek now. It's that was really cool, man. I appreciate that. So I pay him to say that. So, but yeah, the same thing. Like when you first start out, it's hard because you don't know anyone. So it's kind of a crapshoot if you're going to find a good person to collaborate on. And after you've been in the business for a while, you kind of know people. And then like Ted, I know, so I can be like, "Hey, Ted, you ever work with so-and-so, or are they good to work with?" Or Brian, I kind of know from doing a couple of cons, so I can be like, "Hey, Brian, you ever work with this person? Are they, they're good to work with?" But yeah, when you first start out, it's hard because you don't know anyone. The first comic I did, it never ended up getting finished. I think it was 5 pages in, and the artist got a full-time job and couldn't finish it. So it's kind of the risk you take when you're first starting, because you don't know anyone, so you can't, kind of verify their credentials or anything.
Yeah, I mean, like with these Facebook groups, I think if I was maybe a teenager going in there, I would probably be devastated by a lot of the feedback, but I'm not. I'm kind of old and jaded, and I don't care. And so I don't mind asking the stupid questions and being called an idiot, because I'm like, all right, whatever. It's just water off my back, so it doesn't bother me so much. But I could see somebody coming in who have all of these dreams of, being the next, Marvel artist and comic book and, Stan Lee, and everybody wants to be the big name. And I'm like, I just want to get one done, So when I go in there and I kind of get the feel of the room and things like that and who's approachable. But again, it's what I'm finding is that a lot of these groups, when you walk in, and here comes Rob. Let me pop him in here.
Everybody run.
Rob, we're going to let you introduce yourself in a minute. But so what I noticed is that when I go into the groups and things, there are a lot of people who don't know any better, and maybe it's because they don't know the etiquette. So they're like, "I've got a story. Who wants to draw for me?"
Mhm.
You know. So it's one of those things where I think it's probably best to sit back and listen and observe, and then see who you might gel with. So Jake, I think you have a lot of merit in saying that. You know, just kind of see what's out there.
Yeah.
Rob, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
You're eating.
It's been one of those days. I'm an ant killer. I'm a comics creator, and I run comic book advocates, and we're all about reaching out, giving people the ability to learn, giving people the ability to be seen, and bringing together the people within the industry to help each other. I'm not sure about the groups, but I know that our group, the Advocating Network, is always open to anyone with your questions, needs, or just wanting to promote. Feel free to enter and do as you will. It's all up to you to get a fan base. We don't have anything to do with that. In a nutshell. Plus, I make books about fetish monsters and more. And this great book, Cat Dad and Supermom, and there's Cat Dad himself.
All right. It looks like we lost somebody here.
Ted.
Oh, no, we lost Ted.
Ted, come back.
No. Who's going to say nice stuff about me? No, Ted, you got to
Trico is a god who strides the earth.
Excellent.
So I am a storyteller. I love writing stories. I especially love writing flash fiction. And in my head, I can visualize what they would look like as a comic book. But I don't draw. I can't do stick figures. I'm still learning, how to maybe script them out. My frustration is, and I know Brian can speak to this, that when you're writing, and Jake, you can speak to this too. When you're writing a script for film, there's usually a set format. There's a standard format that you can follow. With comic books, I've talked to at least 10 people, and nobody does it the same. This is very frustrating for me.
All different.
Yeah, and I'm like, why? Why is it different? Why isn't there a standard when it comes to taking your story and converting it into a script?
Well, I think the elements of a comic script are consistent in that you're breaking it down per page, per panel, what's happening in that particular panel and what's being said, or the sound effects or the captions, etc. The rest of the format is, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I've evolved my own style of one that I try to keep the artist in mind. So in that regard, I try to think very visually. But otherwise, I say it's very close to like a movie script, except you, instead of like a series of actions, you're taking a snapshot of a moment in time. And Jake, you started to say something.
Well, Brian is right about that, but the thing about why it's different for everybody is depending on the writer as well, because the writer can also be an artist, and that artist can also be, writing, not really writing the script, just drawing out the whole entire comic book, and then just shoving it to like a dialogue writer saying, hey, this is what I did. Here's the footnotes, sort of like the old Marvel method, like Jack Kirby and Stan Lee working together. Yeah. So that's why there's been a whole evolution on how the comic script is written, and it's so many different varying degrees of it. Like you can get someone like Alan Moore who writes full-blown scripts. They're like 5 pages just for one comic page, you know, and vice versa. So there's so many different ways of doing that. Like for me, like when I used to do it myself completely, like from art to the script, I would just draw the whole thing out and then just put in the dialogue. But then when I started working with different artists, like my buddy Nino Mezzarina, I then was like, whoa. So I started visualizing the script, then writing it out, sort of like he said, like a snapshot, sort of like a storyboard that you would do for a movie. And more or less, that's what a comic book ends up being, is a storyboard for like a future movie. In my method, you know, that's how I've always viewed the comic thing as a storyboard, one huge storyboard overflowing.
That's it. No offense, but that's insulting to comics. To call us a storyboard for a movie or a television show is, first off, a storyboard has lack of information. Storyboards are used to make comics. Comics are in-depth, flushed out ideas with everything being done.
There's a difference of opinion, buddy.
No, it's actually the definition. How you use it might be different, but the actual definition of a storyboard for everyone listening, so this is a noob show. So this is for everyone new showing up. The difference between a storyboard, I can do a storyboard. I draw little stick figures, put a little comment.
I make movies too, so
Doesn't matter. We're here for comics.
yeah, I'm here for comics too. I mean, if you're not insulted, I'm sorry. Maybe you can
No,
and I can walk out the door.
I just want real information.
Well, this is real information.
Okay, so
this is my perspective.
But hold on a second. So let's define the storyboard then, because I think when you're coming from a filmmaker's perspective and you're coming from a comic book creator's perspective, for me, when I see storyboard, I imagine having, you know, my notebook, and maybe I'll have grids and things like that, and I'll have sections where I'll put in whether it's dialogue or maybe I'll put in a sticky note or something like that. So for me, again, as a noob, that's my concept of a storyboard from my very little knowledge of what it might look like for film or for a comic book. So what is that definition then?
Storyboard is just.
I mean, is it different for everybody? Is it different for everybody? Is it just a matter of interpretation?
Well, let's put it this way. A storyboard came after comic books. Comic books predate storyboards. The first person credited for using storyboards, of course, is Walt Disney. He used it to describe to his animation team how the pacing of a story should go, while a comic book, again, is beginning to end a full story. You understand? That would be like saying, oh, yeah, a novel is just a script for a movie. It's not. That's what a screenplay is for. There are differences. And it's very important for the new people to understand we're not storyboards. Storyboards are a whole different art. Storyboards are very important. They're not that important to comics because a lot of people don't use storyboards to make comics. I use them only if I need to with my artists. You can't take a comic and just make a movie out of it either. There has to be adaptations.
Sin City?
I'm sorry, did he say something?
Sin City?
Sin City.
Oh, Sin City. Mm-hmm.
They adapted it, and they had to make changes to it. The comics didn't all translate. They had to add parts to it to actually elongate it. Because
so with Sin City, did they take the comic book and then they had to maybe add dialogue and descriptors and things like that, and then they storyboarded for a movie? Is that
camera shot? You had to have cinematography. There had to be people in the way of, because when in a comic book you're talking, it's just there. But in a script, you have to write in, take a pause, take a breath, add a sound, and it has to pace where the sound is. So there's a big difference in there. While a comic book, we just put it all on one panel, and the reader begins to put it together for us because they become the director, the motion picture reel for us. We're giving them a slice of a moment and allowing their imagination to come alive. While a movie is forced to actually show it all and allow that person to sit back and enjoy and consume. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And Ted, what do you think about that? Because it looks like your wheels are spinning here.
I'm observing. I think that there's a method to all creativity. So I know enough about I know about architecture because that's what I spent 30 years doing in my career in Detroit. And I know my dad was an illustrator for many, many years and a Ford designer. And I know storyboarding is just cave painting for the modern man. And that's something to where we can tell stories. It doesn't matter if it's on a comic book, on a piece of newsprint, or if it's storyboarding for a movie, it's a method to creativity to tell a story. Period.
Yeah. Trico, how about you?
I dig what Ted's laying down the story, or what was it caveman paintings for the modern man? I'm stealing that line. That's good.
I'm trademarking that, Trico.
Yeah.
It's not Trico.
Yeah,
it's not Trico marked. It's Ted marked.
Yeah.
See, and again, I don't know any better, and I don't know the difference of the nuances, but I know, I know I'm familiar with that term storyboarding, so it makes sense to me. And how I translate that to get this project done is, it's helpful. It takes me to the next step. And then it's almost like the 101, and then eventually I get the nuance of it, and then I graduate to the 201 of it. So I understand both points of view as far as that's concerned.
Well, in comics, a lot of times they'll use thumbnails. It's kind of like a storyboard.
Yes.
But it's like, even when I'm writing a script, usually I'll write out the beats first, and then when I go to write the actual script, my scripts are usually pretty tight. Well, I'll have like panel 1 and then an explanation of what's going on in panel 1, and then all the dialogue for it. So my scripts are pretty tight. And sometimes if there's something I can't figure out if it's going to work visually, I can't draw it all, but I'll kind of draw my own thumbnails to kind of see, well, would this actually work as a layout when I'm writing out a script? So I think some of the arguments about storyboarding is because we're using storyboarding to refer to the thumbnails, whereas it's kind of more two different things. Storyboards are kind of more for movies, and thumbnails are more for comics.
Well, you can use a storyboard.
So explain, but explain the thumbnail for me. Is that kind of a visual? Is that like, I imagine a piece of my story, I'm trying to convert it into a script, and the thumbnail is kind of like my stick figure drawing that I can try to explain to an artist.
Yeah.
Is that what that is?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I get it.
Yeah, and a lot of times with artists, before they go and draw the entire page for you, because they don't want to waste time and draw and you not like it, they'll kind of just do some sketches, a little bit better than a stick figure, where they'll show you the thumbnail so you can see the page, and then they'll be like, hey, like this, is this good? And then you can kind of say yay or nay, and it saves them a bunch of time, because if they go and finish the whole thing and you say, no, that's completely wrong, then they have to start from square one.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so now if I have, again, it's one of those things where I have a story. I'm like, I have a story. I can see it in my head. I can't translate the idea necessarily onto paper, and maybe in a way I kind of cheat where, you know how you have those dream boards where you see, I visualize my future, and so I maybe grab clips and pieces of art, or maybe magazines or pictures, and I just say, I kind of see this. I mean, is that helpful to kind of put that next to your dialogue and marry that together? Because again, it's for me, I'm trying to stay on scripts. I'm really trying to stay on scripts here. It's really hard because I want to know it all. So when I'm editing is probably my biggest nightmare. It's not that I'm incapable. It's very easy for me to take somebody else's work and help them along. But when it comes to my own work, I don't think I'm very objective as far as that. I'm like, I'm Mozart. It's perfect, So what do you? So what do you do? What is your process when you take? Do you start with a story, or have you guys gotten to a point where you know the story in your head already, and you're already doing those thumbnails, or what is your process at that point? Oh, somebody's jingling.
Yeah, sorry. I forgot to mute my phone.
We'll be back right after this quick break. For Geek Insider advertising opportunities, contact advertising@geekinsider.com. We offer space on the website, in the daily newsletter, sponsored posts, and advertising space on our podcast. For details, contact advertising@geekinsider.com. So who wants to go first here?
I can't hear
Quiet.
Brian. I can't hear Brian, so you have to use sign language. I can hear four people every time I come on.
I only know one thing in sign language.
No, I recognize it's not my show. Because
It's
my
like the
show's
morning
on at
show.
10 a.m. every morning, 7 days a week. Never mind the furthermore on YouTube and Facebook.
I'll read your lips. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. My process is one that I had to evolve over many, many years. And I start with like an elevator pitch, which, 2 sentences. And that way I can tell, do I have a solid story? Because I talk to so many wannabe comic writers who, I've got this, and I'm not exaggerating. I had more than one person come in. I've got this, epic story that, encompasses 50,000 years and 42 and a half different dimensions, and each person, the lineage for 1,000 generations. And I want to get it all in the first issue.
Yeah.
No, what's your story about, young man? Well, the guy, it's an ongoing series about a man who talks to the dead. Okay, but what's the story? What is the conflict? Where is the character development? The same things you would think about if you wrote prose. You wouldn't go, up say to ask Margaret Mitchell, and if she came back with it's a story about a plantation. It's an element of it, but it doesn't really, and it may be the part that they're really fired up about, but it doesn't really encompass the whole of the story, the love story, the war thing. So I start with just the 2 sentences, then I tack on an ending. And this is something that comes through practice, knowing how many pages you've got and keeping with conventions of splash pages and other things that will bewilder you with later, Meredith, because it did for me a long time. But, I break down the story to where, like, on this page, I want this to move the story forward to occur. Then I break it down into panels, and then I do the visuals first. I've learned to do the visuals because I found I was there should be movement in comics. Comics like stage, like movies, are a visual medium. And when the best comics, in my opinion, throughout history, the artist and the writer share the storytelling burden. The artist moves the basic plot while the writer gives nuance. Okay. And there has to be a flow, and there, like I said, a lot of technical things, but then I break it down into what I'm seeing. What is the action going on? And I'm not saying everybody has to hit each other every page, but it could be like one thing that is missing in a lot of people when they have quiet moments like this. If this were a comic page right now, Ted nods sagely. Rob's looking down at his dinner. Brian can't talk without his hands moving. And there we go. And I think Rob is offering me $1 for something. I don't know. But anyway, but we're all doing different things. It's body, it's also, to me, paying attention to body language, to expression. Like Jake, we're the director. And we are, and Ted, and nice knowing you, Ted. Anyway, and we are, and meanwhile, Trico in his mystery lair. But no, I didn't want anyone to feel left out. But you see I hope you're seeing what I'm saying, that, there needs to be like a marriage between the words and the artwork. And the artwork is really what's going to draw a lot of people in, I think, initially, because we all flip through that book. And that's why it's important to get a good artist who not only is simpatico with your goals as far as storytelling goes, but they need to be a visual storyteller as well. So my humble opinion.
So what will you do?
Jake, how about you? Are you guys visual first? The rest of you guys, do you think about the scene first?
Always visual.
Yes.
Always visual.
Yeah.
And Rob, what were you saying?
Yeah, Rob?
I want to know what Brian will do for $1.
Oh,
you hang around long enough, you'll see what I do for a Klondike bar.
I know you're not going to like this answer, Meredith. Oh, I know what you do for a Klondike. I saw the video. Just a man of your age doing that, really.
The fact that I can.
I wasn't. I didn't know you could go that long. So Meredith,
I can't hear Rob, and I'm sure it's great.
I almost got it.
I'm sure it's great.
To answer your question, Meredith, here's the truth. No, not every script is the same. Every script's going to have to be addressed differently. You can't have a solid way of writing something, especially if you're brought onto a project. It's not your baby anymore. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to understand. Because when you're creating your own world, you have nuances that you can put in. You can create an entire universe that you may never use, but you sit there and you make your Bible, your 500-page Bible for a 22-page comic, because that's going to be an epic one day. But when you're brought onto a project, you don't have that. You can't make a script that way. You have to take the parameters you're given and make it your own and give it back to them the way they want it. When you're doing a kid's book, you have to be a lot more visual. When you're doing like poetry, even if a comic's going to have poetry in it, you have to take yourself within your mind. The words have to trigger things, especially if you're doing scenes like a murder book, a really well done murder comic book or a horror comic book. They don't show you a lot. It's about pacing. It's about that methodical, like what's around the corner. And you have to plan out your turn page. So you don't start visually. You start about, how can I creep someone out with just using words and no art? How can I build that suspense? So you really do need to understand what you're creating and then attack it the way you do. Visual is going to be important. I always tell people to look at cinematography. Cinematography is so important. Study it as much as you can. Watch how different people do things. Read comics. Read a lot of comics, even comics you don't like. Read them, read them, read them, read them. That is now your study guide. Don't read just Marvel. Don't just read DC. Don't just read Image. Read anything that you can afford to buy, get your hands on, go to the library, spend 5 hours going through all the graphic novels, look at the manga, look at the what is the other thing that they have? I can't think of the name. It's manga and it's
anime. There's manga and anime. Yeah, the cartoons. Yeah.
Look at all the way that they do things. Take those things into yourself, because all we are as creators are expressive of our experiences, and that's what we're expressing onto paper. So you have to first understand the world around you to be able to express that, and then just make it your own, unafraid, unabashed. This is how I see it. This is what it is. Now, to answer your question before about how you make your script, that a lot has to do with your relationship. Like anything else, when you're starting with an artist, you have to understand, what type of relationship am I having with you, artist? Are you someone who wants me to be overbearing? Because there are some artists who want you to hold their hand the whole way through, show them every little pot and hole in the universe. And then there are artists who want to feel like it's part theirs. And if you overstep too much, if you write a script that's too overbearing, they will leave the project, because they don't want that. They want you to basically hand them a prose and walk away and let them bring back the whole book to you, tell you how many panels it is, show you the page count and say, this is how I see it. And like Trico said, it's thumbnails or it's roughs, as we call it, and it's pages, and they tell you how many pages, and then you agree to the length of it, and then you start. But that's, again, with the artist. So remember, this is a collaboration. What we're doing, there is no, in a comic book, ideally, even with Marvel and DC, there is no real director. Yes, there's a push, but there is coming together to meet in the middle. The really good comics meet in the middle, because everyone's at their best when they're communicating. And that's why you have editors a lot of time, believe it or not. Editors come in to put out fires. That's why an editor is a great thing. When you and your artist are arguing and an editor comes in and goes, hey, guys, I see it better like this. And sometimes neither one of you saw it because you were so embedded into your own idea, you didn't see there was a better idea. So I hate to say it, but the reason there's so many scripts is because there's so many different ways and so many different people. This isn't a one-size-fits-all industry.
Trico, how about you? You have anything to add to that?
As far as like a process for writing scripts.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And with mine, usually I sort of character development, even if it's like a freelance project that I'm getting paid to do. Usually they'll give me characters, like the characters they have in mind for it. Otherwise, if it's mine, I just develop the characters, because before I go to write the script, I have to know the characters so I know what they're going to say or how they're going to react in a situation. So once I get the characters kind of figured out, then I kind of start working on the beats, basically just things that need to happen in the story, different images that I see in the story, even if it's not, usually my beats aren't very chronological at all. You know, I'll, especially when I'm developing my own stuff, it takes a couple weeks, because I'll write out a couple of beats, and then a couple days later I'll be in the shower and I'll think of like a really cool scene for the comic. So then, you know, I'll go back to my notes and write down that beat, And then once kind of everything's together to where I have enough things to make a story for my beat sheet, then I'll do pagination just to see how it'll work. Let me do a share screen here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, hold on a second. Let me pop that in here.
Okay, so then I'll do pagination, where especially when you're doing freelance, you want to use this because usually you're only getting paid to write 24 pages of script. So you have your cover here, and then your inside cover, it's kind of like the credits. Your first page is going to be here. It's going to be on the right. So you want to keep in mind every odd number page is going to be the page on the right. So when they open it, so you know that all your odd number pages are all your page turns. So I know at the end of page 1, I'm going to need to have a, kind of like a cliffhanger page turn here. Going to need one on 3. And, like usually I'll kind of go through and white out whatever ones I don't need. But I kind of use this to kind of try to figure out about like the pacing of it, how I want it to go. Like if I'm doing like a, Alan Moore tends to do like a slow encroaching like first page. So he'll use like the entire first page, just zooming in on like a smiley face with a blood stain on it. Whereas if it's something shorter, like if it's 24 pages in a standalone, I might not do like a really slow opening, but it kind of helps me to figure out where to put the beats from my beat sheet, and it also kind of helps me out as far as where I have to be at certain points, because I'm kind of visual when I write a script. So if it's going to be like say 24 pages, I know right around here I have to be about halfway through. Like if right around page 19, I know I got to start wrapping it up because it's going to be over. So it just kind of helps me keep track of everything. So I use this a lot when I'm writing, just to kind of keep track of where things are, where they're going to be, and also like no matter what you plan on, it almost never falls down this way. You'll find either page 3 kind of will spill over to page 4, or you'll need an extra panel. Sometimes usually I write, it's really weird, it's an odd number. I always write for about like 5 panels a page. That way, if I find I need something else, I can add another panel, or sometimes 4. If I'm doing freelance work, usually I'll write 4 panels per page because they're always going to want you to add stuff. So if I write for 4 panels a page, it gives me a couple panels to play with, because after around 6 panels, your artist usually doesn't like you too much, because after 6 panels, you're kind of asking them to cram a lot of stuff into one page, and usually they're working off a page rate, so less panels are better for them. So yeah, usually I use that, and that's pretty much most of my writing process, and then it's just back and forth editing a dozen times until it's right.
Sweet.
Yeah, and I actually, with because I have newspaper experience, and I used to put together the classified pages and the obituary pages, and that was like a former life. So when I see that, I understand it. It's like I understand that if you have 24 pages 12 and 13 are going to be your center, and you have an opportunity there to do like a full splash. So visually speaking, that was like the money page in the newspaper. And I'm sure that's kind of like the same thing in comic books, and then trying to push your dialogue and seeing where it fits and everything. Now, here's my question. So let's just say I do have a story and I want to script it out. And it's for me, I love dialogue. I love writing dialogue. But in the comic books that I've been studying, there isn't a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of visuals, and there's a lot of big letters for the sound effects and things like that, and I get that. But then when it comes to like, okay, so, if I have in my head, I'm trying to think, like picture, like what's happening in this one scene, because it's not that motion picture. It's not like a movie. I have to take this one clip, and it has to have the most impact visually. And, then thinking about the dialogue and stuff, do you find that sometimes you have to cut the dialogue? Does that help your story? Do you sacrifice that for the visual? And everybody, almost everybody's nodding.
Yep.
Okay, so sacrificing the dialogue is like one of those things again, where as a writer of prose, it would be very hard for me to take that and kind of curb it. And so when, let's just say, I'm going to segue away from this a little bit, because Rob and I had this conversation before. I'll get right to you, Rob. But you and I had this conversation before where I said, is there such thing in the comic book industry as the triple threat? You know, like in movies, you have the singer, the dancer, the actor, and they do all things. And he says, yes, and we hate them.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
But Jake, I mean, you've actually done it all. You've written it, you've drawn it out, you've published it, and everything like that. So you're like the triple threat. We hate mail to Jake, right? No, but seriously, when you don't have that ability, and you at what point do you say when, and you have to release your baby and invest in an editor? At what point do you
When
do
she
that
turns
as a creator?
18. No, I'm only joking.
Well, it depends. Are you charging money for it?
Wow.
If you're charging money for it, you always need an editor, because you wouldn't sell a car without having an inspection done by a trained professional, right? You wouldn't put a building together without an architect who is certified. That's what the editor is. They're the building inspector, the architect that comes in to make sure everything's good. Don't get me wrong. Your editor can be your spouse if you believe that they can be it. You just can't be your own editor, and that goes back to the whole thing. Don't trust a surgeon who operates on themselves. And it's just that simple. You don't. You need someone to. That second set of eyes catches things that you're going to miss because you're so embedded that you don't see it, because you're in love with it. And if you're not in love with it, you shouldn't be doing it. And if you're in love with it, you're doing it, it's your baby, you don't see it. That's why when you take your kid to the school and your teacher conference comes up and the teacher says, you know, your kid does this, and you're like, no. And then you go home and you watch your kid do it and you're like, I never noticed that. That's what they are. They're the wake-up call for you to notice you're making a mistake so the audience doesn't see you make the mistake.
Yeah, there are some people in the industry who can edit themselves, but they are a distinct minority. Even some of the best writers, like Archie Goodwin, who was an editor-in-chief at Marvel and Warren for a while, and an editor-writer at DC. He almost always insisted on somebody else looking at his work for the very same reasons Rob outlined. That it's good to get that somebody to bounce your ideas off of, and somebody who can give you some guidance, especially if you're just starting this journey.
Very true.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I would have liked
No?
to see. I would have liked to see Trico, that spreadsheet that you just did. That would have been great before you edited my book. That would have been awesome.
Oh,
I would love to see that, man. Where'd that come from? Where was
yeah. I
that?
should have. I probably
Alright.
should have passed that along for you.
But no, you're absolutely right on editing. One of the things that Trico did in Retrieve 1, my book that I put out. I have an AI that talks Archimedes in the story, and Trico had the idea of using the font to be more of a digital visual, and it made a huge difference on the way that you even think that this being sounds. It's such a weird thing, but it's such a simple thing. But I didn't even think about that. when I was originally writing it. I knew the voice in my head, but I didn't realize visually what I could do with the lettering, which was really, it was pretty remarkable. I had to really give him props for that. So thanks again, Trico, on that one.
Oh, no problem. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, I think the lesson that I'm learning here is basically like beware of groups. I mean, go in with kind of an open mind and be an observer first, and then as far as scripting, okay, so it's I really have to kind of chew on the fact that a lot of dialogue, because again, I love the dialogue. And Rob, go ahead if you want to pop in here.
Before we get off dialogue, two things about it. You don't sacrifice dialogue to give room to the art. You make the dialogue better. You make the art fit the dialogue. It's not about sacrificing. It's making them work together. If they had to say something, sometimes you can make emotion. Sometimes you can turn the expression a different way. And that sells it for you with less words. Use the art to tell the story as well as the dialogue. And as far as dialogue goes, please, I've read hundreds of comic books. Please learn to write in a way that's different for every character. I am tired of reading comic books where I have to stop and go, wait, who's talking? Who's this person? Because without a unique voice, they all blur into one character. And I feel like I'm watching American Dad with that alien guy who's just all these different characters and doesn't really ever play him too differently. And you always just see him as that character. That's how it feels, guys, when you don't write dialogue well. Get an editor. They'll help you, like Ted said, find their voice.
So now, okay, so I'm kind of piggybacking off of that. With storytelling, good storytellers know whose head they're in, right? Brian, you can speak to this. When we're writing something, we're in one person's point of view, and it gets really confusing for the reader when you head hop, when you're going from one person's point of view to the next person's, and you're like, wait a minute, whose head am I in? But with comic books, I think my perception with the few that I've read, you can hop into anybody's head as long as the visual kind of matches. So that again kind of goes against me as a storyteller to be so strict in somebody's point of view to see that and go, oh, I can be in that other person's head because the visual allows me to do that. So how does that just come with practice? Is that something that I just kind of have to get over myself a little bit, or is it okay to be kind of strict with the POV?
It's entirely up to you, because I've read some comics like Master of Kung Fu that are told from the first person narrative. Then a lot of them are third person omniscient. But Rob mentioned lettering. Lettering has become so very important to comics, especially in the last 30 years. And especially with computer lettering now. If you look at, especially the mainstream color comics, let's say you're reading an issue of Captain America, and then you see the old, when I was growing up, you had thought balloons, those little clouds that appeared over the character's head, and you could hear what he was or she was thinking. Well, in the last 20 years, that's kind of changed to where that sort of narrative is carried by the captions. But with computer lettering now, again, let's say you were talking Captain America, and then you look at the panel, and maybe it's the same color as the character's uniform, or you see like this little watermark of a shield in there. And then when it switches to, say, Thor, you might see a hammer in the corner of the the corner of the caption. That is how modern audiences have now been trained to look for whose point of view. And that way also it makes it a little simpler, because if you do want to switch from one character to another, you are able to do that a little more easily if you've got a good letter. Some people in the past, like Will Eisner, could do that with just recoloring the caption. And like Rob said, giving it a distinctive, giving the person a distinctive cadence to their voice.
Yep.
So, that's where studying the old masters of this art. is so really vital because, like I constantly say, we are standing on the shoulders of titans, on the Jack Kirbys, the Stan Lees, the Will Eisners, Don Heck, Steve Ditko, so many of these people that we grew up with that knew how to tell a story effectively. That's just one way to do it. And the thing is, given your skill level, because I wasn't this smart about 8 years ago, I'll tell you that. I had to write like a whole lot of scripts and have my artist come back and say, is this supposed to make sense? So, and make my editors like weep in front of me. So, it is trial and error, but if you keep an open mind and keep studying the older comics, because we go through phases where a certain type of storytelling or a certain type of art becomes very vogue, but people keep going back to the old masters of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s because they knew how to marry up art and story, like I said earlier. So, and we haven't heard from Jake in a while. Maybe we should hear from Jake. 60s.
Well, Rob's been having his hand up for a little bit, and then we'll go to Jake.
Yes.
I'm trying to behave, but there is one thing I want to point out to everyone, and this is from personal experience. I know you're going to be new. I know you're going to want to come in and reinvent the world. Don't do it. I knew everything about lettering and had lettered a bunch of things. I have lettering credits no one knows I've done, and I won't tell you what they are, but you've probably read it and don't even realize I've done it because I've done that. But then when I did my first book for Monsters, I decided to do things completely different to make it unique. I used different fonts. Never do that in a comic book. This pisses people off. It just absolutely makes people mad because you've done something different. Do not step out of the box until you're a name where you're going to be accepted for stepping out of said box. Follow as many rules and be able to cite the rules. Like Brian said, well, Will Eisner did this. Oh, shit. Sorry. I did not know. Will Eisner did it. Oh, never mind. Continue on. Who did this first? I did it. Fuck you. Do the job right. Read a fucking book and do it like you're told. That's the response you're going to get. I swear to God. Be a good creator. Listen to everyone. Make yourself a Neil Adams. Make yourself a Stan Lee, a Jack Kirby, a Will Eisner. Then you can break the rules. But follow them first and foremost.
Mm-hmm. Jake, what do you have to say to that?
I agree. Follow the rules. And study the masters. I read a lot of comics still. I read Jack Kirby. He's one of my heroes. And I study every day, reading the books, and they were master storytellers. They were able to tell everything through their dialogue. And sometimes you start reading your own comic, and you're like, whoa, this makes no sense. And I have partners and my own editors, and they tell me, Jake, that's garbage. I'm like, okay. And we go back to the drawing board. You have to.
Yeah.
Don't reinvent the wheel, like Rob said.
Michael, how about you?
Oh, kind of getting back to what Brian was saying about the different caption boxes being different colors. I think Dark Knight Returns, Frank Miller used that because he had green for Joker. Because if you look at that, there's almost no diegetic narrator in the whole thing. It's almost all like first person narrative. So, and he just used different caption boxes throughout the whole thing, so you knew basically who was telling which part of the story. So yeah, you can kind of play around for a little bit like that, but yeah, you don't want to like Rob was saying, you don't. It's almost like you have to prove to everyone you know the rules before you can break them. Even if you know the rules, you got to show everyone else you know the rules. Before you can kind of break them.
Yeah, Ted, do you have anything to say to that?
Ditto. Yeah.
Ditto.
Yep, ditto.
Yeah, that really makes sense to me because I have to wonder, and this is going to be a future panel, but I know that comic books is a business first and foremost. If it's something that you want to do for a living, if this is something that you want to pursue, and for me, it is something I feel like I'm on the path of something and I'm really excited about it. So in my head, I'm already putting in my head that this is a path that I want to pursue. And I want to take it seriously more so than a hobby. And I have to wonder, it's got to be staggering how many people have had those really enthusiastic starts and then they've kind of withered away and died and you never hear from them again. So I mean that's really got to be a frustrating for the creators. But so I want to ask you guys, what made you keep going? I mean, because everybody that I've talked to, they've all said that their first comic was just terrible. I mean, if you could go back and redo it, and maybe some of them have, what has made you continue to go along this path?
A little bit of
Brian?
insanity.
Okay.
Exactly.
Insanity, okay. I got that.
Stubbornness.
Or at least I can say I don't have the paperwork that says I'm sane either. So
There we go. There we go. Hashtag
Rob,
fueled
go
by
ahead.
spite.
Love.
There.
I love comic books. I love everything about them. I love their smell. I love the feel. I love the adventure they take me on. I love just the ability to see someone else's point of view about the world that they're giving me. There's nothing I don't love about comic books except the bitchy Yenta creators who are always complaining. It's the only part I don't like. But besides that, the books themselves I love, and they have so much passion put in them. And that's why I get so upset when they're not done well. And I don't mean well with the story. Everyone can yell about story and art and have their opinions. I mean not following the fundamental basics. One of the things I said is not anyone can make a comic book. And what I meant by that was, sure, you can staple pages together, throw art, throw lettering all over the place. It has to have a concise, serialized story. And if you're jumping around and you're unable to bring an idea to a story and make that story flow, it stops being a comic book, and it's really just an art ad for the artist, because the artist is showing off what they can do. And as a writer, you failed. You have to be able to start a story and end it exactly where you want it to, and entertain throughout the whole book and draw people. You read my first issue of Barber Unleashed. At the very beginning of that issue, it starts very, very slow. And everyone has said this. Suddenly it gets quicker, and it was on purpose. It was that downward spiral that it was going to take you on, and it made you feel uneasy how quickly the pace picked up. As a writer, you need to know what you're doing on page 1. And if you don't know, it'll show by the last page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with that, it was. I would almost compare it to a roller coaster. You're going slowly up the hill, and then all of a sudden it's like whoosh, and off you go, and hold on for dear life. So, this is really exciting for me, and I'm gonna say, I have a story, and I do visualize it. And so, learning the terminology so that I don't sound like a complete idiot, whether it's, we say storyboarding, thumbnails, what was the other one? Not scripting, but it's just, there's a certain terminology, I think, that to study this, and all of you had said, study the greats, kind of get an idea of what other people are doing. For me, when it comes to writing a story, and I write on several platforms, and they say that quality is very subjective, and it is. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But for me, it's always been important to have the basic fundamentals. So when I'm writing a blog post, for example, you have to have a really good featured photo. You have to have a title, headers, and then a good body of work that goes with it, and it has to flow. And when you have those fundamentals, it doesn't really necessarily, there you go. It doesn't matter what the content is, as long as you have that foundation. And then from there, if it's good, if you've done the structure right, and you have the good foundation, and you have the good bones and the walls and everything, everything else is kind of icing on the cake. And then you find the people who really can be attached, and it's that emotional connection, I think, to the story. Then that comes later. So again, for me, it's really learning the fundamentals, getting that. I call it a schematic, but you have the pagination or pagination or however you want to say it. Having that and saying, okay, I've got a script. And in my head, I'm like, the easiest way, because I know how my brain functions. And probably the easiest thing for me to do would be to take bits and pieces of my story and put them on sticky notes and put them on a board where it's kind of paneled out.
Sure.
I mean,
sure.
is there, when you were starting out, what was that tool that you did? Was there a certain system that you did it? Was it like, okay, I'm going to dedicate a page to this one panel, and I'm going to try and kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, or what is that toy where you had the 9 squares and you had to shift them around and things?
Oh, Rubik's Cube?
No, not the Rubik's Cube. It was like the square puzzle thing, and you had to slide them.
Tetris.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it kind of feels like that, where I'm like, okay, well, what can, what's the easiest thing for me? The way my brain functions is like sticky notes. I've got a bunch, I carry them everywhere. And it's like, okay, well, here's the idea. Here's what I'm thinking that it'll look like. And I'm just going to put that on a page right there. And then we'll flesh out what that page might look like later, and hope it makes sense to an artist when I get to that point. I mean, the scripting thing is just really, I'm learning a lot, and I took quite a bit of notes here as far as that's concerned. So if you can think back to when you first started, and maybe you were just a kid with your crayons, and you were like, I'm just going to draw. I'm going to draw this out. What was your process, and then how did you graduate to where you are? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first, just so everyone can think about that, because you can tell everyone's trying to think how to put this. For me, it was kind of simple. I read a lot of comics. It became second nature. It really did. You kind of, this would make the great splash page as you're thinking of your own story. Oh my God, this is where I can do that split thing, or this is where I can break the panel and show that this is so exciting, it's going off the page. Just being a comic book fan, I'm telling you, man, it's just intuitive at that point when you really are a comic book fan. If you're just picking up comics now, because I mean, Brian K. Morris, I know for certain, has read thousands of comic books as the professor to my, I guess it would be, it's my left this way, but it's a dyslexic nightmare. over there. He's read thousands of comics. I'm sure Jake has read thousands of comics. I'm sure Ted has. It becomes second nature. In your mind, it starts to become alive. And you argue with your artist because you and your artist see it differently. And you're like, no, this is supposed to be that panel where it's like this. And they're like, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I'm an artist. And you're like, I've heard that before. No, I'm right. And that's where you tag the editor in, who tells you you're both idiots and tells you a way to combine both your ideas.
Exactly.
So it's about passion. It really is. Since you were a kid with making a crayon comic that only your mom would say she loved and then threw out and you never saw it again in your life, it all just starts with passion being thrown up on the page and then polishing it. That's where the editor comes from. Polish. Make it worth the money that you're going to charge someone, and make it worth their fandom. Same fandom that you had for the other creators. Brian?
Well, thank you, Rob. My journey started like when I was about 6 or so. I started making up my own characters and making little comics, and of course, you should, like Rob said, you show it to your mom, and she's like, "Bless your little heart." And eventually, when I was in my teens, I decided I was going to draw up my own story, and I had very little comprehension of you weren't supposed to draw like about 50% more pages than the comic would allow you to have. Because most comics are in a 32-page signature with an outside cover. And I think my first submission was something like 36 pages. and it was a superhero script to a company that didn't do superheroes. It was just like I did everything wrong in this submission, but make personal attacks on the editor's mother. Now, what saved me, fortunately, was this was Charlton Comics, which was kind of like the little company that could. And just to give you a clue, the characters in Watchmen were based on Charlton characters, which is another story there. But what they did was they had also produced at that time, I got one of the first copies of it. It was a little guide on how to produce comics, from writing the thing to drawing to penciling to lettering to coloring. I still own an Ames lettering guide because I took that thing seriously. And through that, I realized that thank you, Ted. Thank you. And from there, I realized that there is a discipline to this, and that there are a whole lot of technical issues. And once I saw that, I started noticing things. Like I found an old letter column where the editor of Superman in the 60s said that he only allowed his writers to use no more than 7 panels per page at that time, because comics were drawn in a larger size and they could do it. Now 6 is kind of the preferred, thing for the majority of artists. But anyway, the editor only allowed 35 words per panel. And you have to make allowances for, sound effects, for add in the captions. And basically, if you had fewer panels per page, figure it as about 200 words per page. See, now this is, we've been talking about the technical aspects of comics and the like cliffhangers on every right-hand page, etc. And this is where, the basics, this is the foundation from which, comics are put together. And of course, as has been said, you look at somebody like Pablo Picasso in his early stuff, his early work is almost photorealistic. But you see the stuff that he's more famous for, it's where he learned the basics, then learned where he could push and break them down. Right. And all the great artists and writers were that way.
Absolutely.
We know the rules, and then you have to figure out which ones you are going to break and why. Right, Rob?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
That's right.
And actually, Ted, you were going to say something?
Being in architecture, I mean, it's going to sound like a cliche, but you build with foundation before you build the structure. And that's the bottom line.
We'll be back right after this.
Let me end it.
I've always thought that I should have been a writer first. I was a great designer, but I'm a better artist writer, I think. Just because I think that the characters and the stories that we all have, Rob said it's the love that drove him to, for me, it's the voices, the voices that go away after the project's done. And that's something to where I don't know if you guys have that same reasoning, but the foundation, though, yeah, you understand. The foundation in building a comic is just like in architecture. You've got to make sure that it's literally watertight. You got to make sure that that storyline is going to impact. You want to tell the story, but you want to impact the people that are reading it. Because I learned just as much from my readers about them. I mean, they should learn more about themselves after they read a comic of mine. Hopefully for the better. Hopefully that they're not nuts. But if so be it if they are. But I think that there's really a foundations like Brian was saying. You gotta start out and you've got to produce it though. You got to have the basic lines. Like in anything else, you got to learn them. Like Rob said, you've got to push that envelope. Shakespeare didn't start. He probably started writing very vaguely, and then look what he produced. I mean, there's so many different. Frank Lloyd Wright, greatest architect ever lived, He wasn't always that way, and he broke rules all of his life after he got the basics down. So,
Trico, anything?
As far as starting out as a writer?
Yep, just starting out, and like your first venture into comic books and things. And how did you know that it was what you wanted to do?
Grew up reading comics and everything. We moved around a lot, and it was cheap entertainment. So I read a lot of comics, and there wasn't, it was the '80s, so there wasn't really any entertainment you could take with you. So comics were a cheap option for that. So I grew up reading comics, and I was always like, well, one day I'm going to make a comic. It was on my bucket list. And then in my 30s, I'm like, oh man, I haven't done most of the stuff I always thought I would have had done by now. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to write a comic. And at the time I was working on a MFA in writing. So I had a class that was basically about sequential art and writing for sequentials. So I had that. We read all the ones everyone tells you to read. We read Mouse. We read Watchmen. We read Persepolis. Like everything that everyone tells you to read, we read. And I got Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. Read that. So I'm like, all right, I'm really prepared. I know my stuff. I'm a graduate student in a creative writing program. And my first script was still horrible. It was really bad. And but I didn't know it at the time, so I made the comic, and I didn't realize how bad that was. And then I made another comic that was still pretty bad. But as I progressed, they just kind of slightly got better to where now they're not half bad.
you're a good writer, Troy. So don't sell yourself short. Dude. I own quite a few of them. Yeah, they're good. They're good.
And Jake, how about you? I think I missed you here.
I knew I wanted to do comics since I was a kid, and I started drawing comics and creating comics. And my worst critic was my mom. She would pick up the book and like, this sucks. You could do better. Literally, for real. Yeah, my mom. I love my mom to death. But if you're watching, Mom, I'm sorry. You were my worst critic. I would draw the comic on regular, 8.5 by 11 and staple it and sell it to my friends. And then and that's how I started. I was like 8 years old, started making my own comic. And I knew that's what I wanted to do, was be creative. And comics was a cheap alternative for me, and for most people. And then you just love comic books. I wanted to be Jack Kirby. I wanted to be Eric Larson. All these guys that you start following when you start picking up your first comic book. And you just, and for me, it was either draw on paper or draw on the walls. And that's so I was telling stories, and then and then my friends will come back and say, that was a good book. Keep working that way, and that's how I slowly honed my craft into creating comics, because you would get feedback from other people. Do more of that. Not what you did last issue. That was kind of bad, and keep on. And then, like everyone's been saying, study the masters, and learn all the technical skills from the masters. And then, once you build a name, or you think that you're bold enough to break the mold, then go right ahead. But you got to know all the technical aspects before you venture out of that 4x4 frame.
Mm-hmm. I have a memory of when I was in middle school, and I was just the awkward, shy, quiet kid. You wouldn't know that by knowing me now, but I had a very tight-knit group of friends. I mean, it was just like the four of us, and we went through the wars together. That's what it felt like. And one of our hobbies was actually create, because we loved Star Wars. That's what I grew up with. So we would take the dialogue, we would make up our own dialogue, and we actually did a collaborative effort to put together a Star Wars comic book. And we were so proud of the product that we made a copy of it. We shipped it off to Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and immediately got a cease and desist.
No!
You've arrived. Yeah. Well done.
So, but then, again, life happens, and we got away from that. And I mean, that just broke our little hearts, but, and here I am, again, I'm closer to 50, and, it's just, for me, it's never too late to go after those creative endeavors, because I
Oh,
don't, there's
Absolutely.
anybody that I
Absolutely.
know who regrets being creative. They might regret going into sports or some other field, but never a musician, an artist, a writer. I've never seen anybody in that creative venue that regretted doing it. And so for me, this is an exciting journey. And if there was one person, because we're getting close, and I want you guys to make sure that you promote yourselves and where we can find you and stuff, because we're getting on the 1.5 hour mark. But if you were to give me, there you go, Ryan Pro. If you were to give me one person to study, who would it be?
Artist or writer or what?
It doesn't matter. Just if you were to say whether it was a comic book series, or if it was a writer, or Jack Kirby.
Yes.
Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby was influenced by film of the 30s, just like a number of other artists like Bob Kane and Alex Raymond and Will Eisner were. But Kirby developed speed. He was one of the fastest artists in the field, whereas some guys would struggle to get one page penciled per day. And that's just the penciling stage. Kirby would just fly. And as a result, his anatomy went out the window. Yeah. But his there was so much energy in his storytelling. And while on a scripting level, I think you can find other people to do more convincing dialogue. And I've got a slew of people I could recommend in that regard. But as far as visual storytelling, I would say probably, and especially if you're looking to do any sort of genre, because Kirby is famous for superheroes, but he also did crime. He also did romance. He did horror. He did every damn thing under the sun, because he was trying to feed his family. And so he put his all into every job he did. So, and Jim Shooter, who used to be an editor at Marvel and was a writer at DC and several other companies, Valiant, for instance, he used to have a blog, and he had a 3-part blog where he went through one of Jack Kirby's stories and explained why visually it was a masterpiece, how Kirby commanded the flow of the story, and all the strengths he brought into the visual aspect of it. He was a storyteller. Also, he knew how to write. He was also an editor. He was another one of those multi-threat guys. But his specialty was drawing these incredible stories where the thing just moved like lightning. John Buscema, I think, would be the second one. Yeah. He and Stan Lee collaborated on a book in the 70s called How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which is still in print. And as a writer, that's one of my more influential books, because he's the one who taught me how to take a static scene and change it from talking heads to something visually exciting. And that is, there are several really good books on the market that, in addition to reading the comics, I think if you want to learn the more technical aspects of comic creation, there are some really good books out there. But yeah, my number one would probably be Jack Kirby. Close runner-up is probably John Buscema as far as storytelling ability. Now, if you talk about design, I could throw in somebody like Carmine Infantino, who did The Flash forever. But as far as basic nuts and bolts excellence in comics, Jack Kirby is the man and always will be.
I would say, and I think those are awesome. I would say, I'm a Mike Mignola freak. I mean, I love Mike Mignola's work. Anything with the folklore, not just Hellboy, but everything that he's done. I think that is and the way that he draws, the way that he stylizes things to where your mind has to work with shadow, to the point where the shadows don't work, but your mind understands what it is. Will Eisner. I can't say enough about Will. Those are the two that that I'm done. I'm out. That's it. I'm done. That's it. That's it.
Jake, did you throw in a couple names here?
Jack Kirby, Will Eisner, two big
Yeah,
names.
those even before today, those are the names that have been tossed out there as you have to study them. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. Rob, how about you?
What names are you specifically looking for? I feel like you want something specific. Give me a specific, and I'll give you a name that'll help you.
I think what I'm looking for, because today the topic is scripts, so the I guess the study in scripting and moving the story arc from first to last page.
Scripting, I would say Bob McLeod made a good one, a good book on the way that comics are made. Also, there was a Marvel, Make Comics Marvel Way. While it's very, very outdated, it gives you the principles at a very beginning stage. And then if you put on top of that, not Neil Adams.
Danny O'Neill?
No.
Danny O'Neill did write a very good book on comic book writing. So.
Yes, he did. No, but I'm thinking more basic because we're talking basic storytelling right now. Crap, I can't think of off air. I actually own the book, but it did help me. It was like Scripting 101. It's a little bit older.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I don't remember who did that either. But
and then obviously Will Eisner actually made just these amazing books that break down the different aspects of it. And I'm sure there's one that covers scripting in its own thing, because they did collected versions and then they did specific versions. And the cool thing, they're expensive to buy, but almost every library, which is now opening in Florida, thank God libraries are going to be open again. You can go to a library, check it out, and actually have the time to read it. So that's what I would do. Go to your local library. Do that. In Florida, we get this cool pre-checkout thing with your local library. So sign up, pre-check out the Will Eisner ones. I'm telling you, Will Eisner will. Everyone bases mostly what happens. Even Stan Lee. A little secret is Stan Lee took a lot of what Will Eisner was doing because he was working with those guys coming out of Eisner's studios. Because during the war, Eisner had to leave, and a lot of his guys wound up working for Marvel at the time. But Will Eisner's definitely a place. I'm not sending you to the advanced ones. I want you to learn at the basic ones so you have an understanding, and you're going to throw a lot of it away when you're ready. But you'll have like we said, you'll have those basics built in that will help you take the step to where you're comfortable as a writer.
Trico, how about you? You have any recommendations for me?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the Scott McCloud stuff, he really breaks it down really good. I recommend everyone do that before they write any scripts. Plus, the whole thing's set up like a comic book, so it's nice. You're not reading like a textbook or a prose book, so it's a good read. Andy Smith, I think is his name. He has a Insider's Guide to Creating Comics and Graphic Novels. That's really good because it kind of lets you kind of see it as a writer. For me, it let me see it through the eyes of an artist, so it allowed me to kind of visualize the panel layout better as I write. So I would check that one out. And then for you, because it sounded like you were concerned about sacrificing dialogue and a lot of the prose, right? I would check out some Chris Claremont, because if there's one thing he didn't do is sacrifice any words, because his stuff is really purple.
Oh God, no!
So like Brian was saying, there's like a 200-word maximum per page. Chris Claremont blew that out of the water. It's probably like 400 or 500 a page. Yeah. So check him out.
He's one of those who made it, and he could do whatever the hell he wanted to, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I would check him out because he doesn't sacrifice anything. He tells a good story, and then it's going to sound weird because he didn't write any comics, but I would check out Ernest Hemingway. He has like a journalist background, kind of like you, and because you said you worked at a newspaper, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So he kind of has that same background, and his stuff is really concise. Like he packs like a lot of emotion and storytelling into a very small amount of words. So if you kind of look at the way he kind of phrases things and the dialogue he uses, that'll probably help you out as far as trying to, so you don't have to sacrifice any dialogue or any narration in the comic for you.
And if you're really worried about that dialogue, read a book about lettering. understand lettering, understand the fundamentals of what lettering will be. It'll give you a great idea. And I would read an older one because I'm sorry, but I like the older writers. I like the earlier stuff where they had more dialogue. I think that the worst thing about comics right now is that you have these lazy letterers who only want to do a certain amount in there, and they limit you. That takes away from the story. I'm very dialogue heavy. I am a very driven dialogue writer. And there
I was actually going through, I had a variant cover of Arrow, and I'm flipping through the book, and I'm like, where the hell's the dialogue? You know, it's like, and it was very pretty and everything, but I didn't feel like there was so much of a story, and I felt like it was such a letdown for me. And I am essentially a storyteller, and I, you know, for my personal book, and you know, full disclosure, guys, this path is hopefully going to get me, you know, I gave myself a deadline of a year to try and get a book published, you know, whether it's on my own dime or, you know, if I have to draw with crayons and stuff like that, just to say I did it, you know, and just kind of going on this path, you know, because that to me is so important, is understanding the fundamentals. We need to know the ABCs before we can read. And that's where I am now. I do have, because of my background, my age, whatever experience that I can glean from and divert into this project. You know, I'm not saying that I'm coming into this completely cold. I understand schematics, I understand page design and things like that, but those were always more for words. And then with storytelling and things like that, trying to marry that into the images in my head. If I could take those images and it translated down my arm into a piece of paper, you know, I'd be golden. But I'm not. So this whole path of learning those fundamentals, networking, you know, and finding people that whose opinions I trust, you know, who can kind of guide me along this pathway. So that I put something out that will probably be crap, but I don't strive for that. I strive to be as good as I possibly can be and put out the best product as possible. But, you know, I expect the learning curve, and I don't expect perfection with it, but I'm going to try. And that to me is the important part, is the journey to get there. Because maybe you know, as long as I don't give up, this second one could be better. You know, and so we're going to close out because we're at like 90 minutes, and I just want to kind of go around the room. If you guys could let everybody know where to follow you, what you do again, you know, just give us a quick overview of you. Go ahead, Brian. I'm going to put you up on the big screen, and I'm just going to go down the list here.
Okay. I don't do quick. Anyway, I'm Brian K. Morris, Rising Tide Publications, comic books, and mostly books right now, but we are working on some stuff for other publishers. RisingTidePublications.pub, RisingTide.pub, rather, is where you can sign up for my monthly newsletter. And if you want to get an insight into how I broke into writing, there's a book called The Haunting Scripts of Bachelor's Grove, which has a very familiar name on it. And the first half of this book details how I got involved in comic book and specifically horror writing. But otherwise, you can come on my daily show, Nevermind the Furthermore, on my channel, YouTube, and the Rising Tide Publications page on Facebook, and pick my brain on Nevermind the Furthermore, 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Time, 9 Central, or come to Clever Title Pending, where we have various creatives on. I interview them, and you get to interrogate them also. This happens every Tuesday night at 8 p.m., 7 p.m. Central. So please follow me on all the major social platforms, and we'll be looking for you soon.
Jake Estrada, you just look for me on social media, type in my name, Jake Estrada. You'll see my big hairy face or real tall pictures. You might even see my shoes. So look for Jake Estrada, comic book creator, publisher, actor, director. Peace, guys.
I'm on Instagram under prof_trike, or YouTube channel, Professor Trike. It's mostly all things related to when I'm teaching classes, such as history or literature. Online, if you Google my name, you'll find there's I think there's a Comic Vine and a Amazon under Trico Lutkins. So some of my work and stuff will be on there. I have some new stuff coming out yet, but I don't even have the website for the new company I'm starting ready yet, so I can't even send you to it.
Okay.
My name is Mr. Anderson, and I am a proud comic book advocate. And you can find all the advocating we do at Comic Books Advocate. And I'm proud to have Brian K. Morris, Indie Vault, Meredith with her new the Comic Newb and Geek Insider, plus NSC, all coming together with Luke Stone and Starcross Comics. We're getting everyone together, and we're advocating for comics together because comics will rise. And us independent creators can all gather together in the network that we created for you, the Advocating Network, are here on Facebook. For those of you watching on Facebook, thank you for all the comments, by the way, in our chat room where the watch party is. Sorry I didn't get to all of them. It's not my show, but I'm sure Meredith will check them out later and address them all to you directly. And you can find my stuff and find out about the books that I make about fetish monsters and more. One of those more books is about a farting elephant. That's right, a farting elephant that teaches morals with every fart. Well, not every fart, but does teach morals with farts at MrAnderson.com and CatDad and Supermom.com. Thank you for tuning in and, starting your education on how to create comics today.
Hello, everybody. My name's Ted Davies, and I would love for you to stop in at Ted Davies Artistry on YouTube, as well as Ted Davies Artistry on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I am setting up my TedDaviesArtistry.com website right now, so you'll be able to purchase everything through that site. Let's see you on social media, guys. Thanks. Have a good night.
You know what I've learned also is that I really have to put together a pitch because I have none. But I want to thank you all so much. This is the Comic Newb. It's going to be, we're going to do this every Friday. Next week, we're actually bringing it to 7 o'clock because I want to drink with Carl. He has an 8 o'clock show. So... So that's what I'm going to be doing on Fridays. And then next week is going to be pitching to editors. I've got 3 people so far. I've got 2. Is it 2 more? I've got 1 more seat available. So if you guys if there's an editor out there who wants to sit in on the panel and, I can question you, you can teach me. I will take all the wisdom that I possibly can and learn from you guys. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to school me. I'm good with that. I am humble enough to take all the lessons here, and really, I will be following you guys and trying to learn from the best because I don't think that you would have been here unless you have an open heart and you're willing to help your fellow creators, whether it's for advocating or just mentoring. And I really appreciate that. And as we share this out on our network and things, it's going to be on Geek Insider. It's on the OnCon network. We're going to be with the Comic Book Advocating Network. And it's going to be up on our podcast. And that's going out on Spotify and our iHeart and Podbean and all that good stuff. So we're trying to reach as broad an audience as possible so that we can get the learning going. And really, for anybody who's out there who's ever wanted to try, there's no harm in trying. And it doesn't matter how old you are. If you're young at heart and you have the capacity to learn, you can do this. And if you want to see me go for it first, I'm all for that because the lessons that I learned, I want to share. And I am standing on the shoulders of giants. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. And that's it. We're going to end the broadcast. I'm just going to put my little banner up here. It's from Story to Script. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Comic Newb, a Geek Insider production powered by NSC Live TV and member of the Comic Book Advocating Network. Become part of our show with sponsorship and advertising opportunities. For details, contact advertising at geekinsider.com or visit podcast.geekinsider.com. The Geek Insider podcast is available on your favorite app, so please hit the follow button and share it out to your friends. Because if you don't, you might have to turn in your geek card.